As Babu Frick once said, hey, hey, hey! And welcome to this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. In this episode, I want to talk a little bit about custom head designs. So what I mean by that is, because the word custom can kind of be used in multiple different ways. Basically, I'm referring to the idea of putting a mask or a head design on your mocks that isn't using a typical mask element. So, you know, your Tahu mask, your Liwa mask, your Kupaka mask, your Halimari mask, whatever. We're not going to be using those in today's episode. We're going to be looking at building masks that fit more unique purposes, or masks that use a whole bunch of different pieces to make up the head design. All sorts of stuff like that. So let's dive into the episode and then you'll get a bit more of a clear picture as to what I'm specifically talking about. We will have a few like custom masks. Like there is one example here that does use some painted pieces and stuff, but this episode isn't necessarily referring to or directly referring to pieces that are illegal or non-purist, all of those different words. No, we're going to talk more about head designs that are custom brick-built head designs. That's the way to word it. So the first mock we've got today is by Tyler, and it's called Urban Operative. So let's take a look at the head design on this mock here. This one uses some minifigure magnifying glass piece elements. Really, really great part use for sure. It really fits that gas mask aesthetic, which this mock is obviously aiming to replicate here. And I think that's also just a really cool idea, or kind of general principle, is the idea of looking into various minifigure utensils and weapon pieces, all sorts of stuff like that, because some of them have very unique shapes to them, or in this case here, they kind of look like the sort of eye holes that you would see on a gas mask. I'm sure the eye holes have a specific name, and if they do, I'm not familiar with it, but there's a really nice part use there, and I think it's just a good general principle to look at a lot of your smaller pieces, look at a lot of your minifigure utensils, look at some of those really odd and obscure pieces, and see if that could be worked into a head design on a Bionicle for sure. I also love the tire pieces that are being used towards the bottom of this mask here. It's more of an interesting tire piece. You've seen them on, they've come on a few like kind of mine carts and different things, but that little kind of tire piece there that's got that silver stud on it really also helps to form the aesthetic of the gas mask there. So whether you're playing around with more sort of solid tires or your rubber tires, I think tires are also a good thing to look into as well if you're designing a head design here. So I think that's important to do, kind of study the pieces that are used across a wide variety of the specific element that you want to focus on your build, and then go, okay, if people are more commonly using those pieces, then maybe I need to look into using some of those pieces myself, you know? It's just fun to study. So like on this head design, you know, I often say the idea of using system pieces to create more detail-heavy designs. But I think what's good here is that the use of system here actually really helps to convey a nice sense of texture as well. Specifically on the very back of this gas mask here, it does have that more sort of leather-like look, or that sort of more kind of material-like look that you can see a specific gas mask, depending on the gas mask that you have or use. So I think that is also very fitting as well. So can you do that? Can you use some system pieces in your Bionicle mock to convey texture as well? But overall, yeah, this humanoid character here is fantastic. Very, very system heavy, but that's not a bad thing at all. There's always a lot you can learn from looking at more system heavy mocks and applying that sort of stuff to Bionicle for sure, especially with the way that some of these joints are connected here, not using any ball joints, using more sort of clip and hinge elements as well. Works very well. Some stuff that I really love on this mock though is not actually the humanoid character, but the background here. Really nice sort of world building that it helps to create here. Just these nets, these sort of dead leaves on the floor, and also this kind of gate at the back here with the vines and different things. It's not really that heavy on pieces. He's just put a few nets down. He's just put a few of these gates up, and they don't even really look all that connected. Oh, well, there's a tile in the middle there. I didn't quite see that until now. Never mind. But still, it's not all that parts intensive necessarily. And so that's something you could consider too if you have built a really cool Bionicle mock and you want to just spice up the pictures a bit. Can you just grab a few random elements or pieces here and there and just sort of dress up the background a little, you know? Have a think about, okay, well, where would my mock be? What kind of world would he live in? All that sort of stuff. And then see if you can find some pieces that can help create that atmosphere or build that world But definitely make sure that the background elements aren't overpowering the mock here. I think that Tyler does a fantastic job here of not letting that be the case. I think that's kind of down to the lighting and the color choices and stuff, but it works super well. And definitely my favorite addition here on this backdrop are the little bullet holes in the wall behind him here, simply created there with some of those pneumatic tube elements being put inside a Technic brick with the little cross axle in the middle there. Those could just as easily be flex tubing as well. It's a little hard to tell, but it creates a very realistic looking kind of bullet hole. It's really well done. So fantastic work, a really cool mask design here. Let's move on to another one. It's by our boy Eclipse Caller. And this mock, or this whip rather, it's more of a work in progress, it doesn't necessarily seem that it has a full name yet, but at the moment it is just being referred to as Night Whip. So what I love so much about this is this really interesting head design that's created simply through finding ways of combining a skull spider mask and a jawblade mask. And it creates this interesting kind of rivet in the middle that mirrors certain knight-like helmets. It's a very, very simple little combination there, but it does a lot and really, I think, very effectively matches a knight-like helmet. So that's something to consider and something to look into. What sort of mask elements can you kind of put together? You know, can you complement a couple pieces together that, ironically, if you look at it in a specific way, it kind of looks a bit like a face? You know, yeah, why not try that? Do that. Pick up your pieces, just sort of shove them together, see if anything starts to form. It might not. I'm sure there's some masks that just simply will not go together no matter how much you try. But there might be something like this where you go, oh, hey, I never would have thought that would have worked, but it kind of looks like a knight's helmet. Perfect, you know? So look into that. See what you can do. And that's just as simple as just getting two pieces together and not even actually attaching them yet. Just sort of shoving them into each other and seeing what happens. And yeah, just hoping for the best, seeing what kind of connections you can come up with. I love too on this Night Whip so far the interesting sort of sigil that's being created on the front of the knight here with this jumper piece that's being placed in the middle of the chest. These jumper pieces, of course, came from the Invasion from Below sets, and I believe that was their official name, was that they were referred to as jumpers, not to be confused with the other system element known as a jumper, or, you know, an actual physical jumper as well. He's not too cold yet. He doesn't need to be wearing a jumper. He's got that armor on, so he's good. But I just like how that sort of ties the torso together. It just looks nice, but it also kind of looks like, yeah, he's got a sigil on his armor. He's got some sort of symbol or crest or something that symbolizes his kingdom or who he fights for or his king or something like that. So that's a nice little part use that really kind of brings the torso together as well. And also the drills being used for the arm design here, that's also just a very nice part use, but also just kind of interesting kind of texture play here. It does start to look a lot more like knight-like armor. Just the interesting shape of them just conjures up that to me. So I think that's very cleverly done. So I'm looking forward to seeing this one advanced and made into a finalized mock, but so far there's a lot we can learn about textures, playing around with pieces, and creating some cool head designs, or mask designs rather, for a Bionicle mock. So some cool principles here, that is for sure. This next mock is by Poor Disadvantaged, and it's called Vezok the Beast. So what's so cool about this mock is that it does and it doesn't have a custom head. It is simply just using the Paraka spine element that came on Vezok. And yes, at the start of the episode I said we won't be using any prefab masks, and you could say that that classifies as one, but he's managed to make that prefab mask a little bit more customized. If you take a look at the teeth on this mock here, he's used some of the teeth elements that you get on like Mixels and a few other different sets, and he's made his own style of a tooth design for this mock. Even sort of given it a bit of a different color. It looks like it is more tan than it is white, which was what it typically was on normal Paraka sets. And then additionally, he's added a whole bunch of spikes. He's even added an eye patch as well. What a great design. Just, I imagine getting a little minifigure screwdriver or some sort of flex tube or something and just feeding it through the hole in the eye there. And because you don't have to actually add the white skull underneath it, you've got room to put things inside the eye, which is perfect. But the act of doing that, can you get a Bionicle mask or a Paraka spine like this and really go ham? How much detail can you add on top of or inside the mask to give it new life? I think that's a great way of approaching adding a mask onto a mock. Because, hey, that's the thing. There's nothing wrong at all with just getting a random mask and putting it on a mock, and that's all you do. Many times that can look fantastic, but if you want to try some new things or go the extra mile or something like that, can you add further details on top of that mask and really make it shine? There's something to consider. And I think this is a brilliant example of how effective that can look. And speaking of things looking effective, there's a lot to love about this mock. I love there's just so many little details on this mark, from the peg leg, the hook. He's really building on that sort of more aquatic, water-like theme that is, typically associated with the blue Bionicle characters. That, and I love the kind of waistcoat design that he's got as well, using some of those black kind of sail plastic pieces there. And the fact that he's used some of these Nokama Hordika. I was going to say Nodika there for a minute, but that's me combining two words. The Nokama Hordika weapon pieces there as a kind of continuation of that waist design, but it also kind of looks a bit like anchors. Like, this guy is just such a tank that he is just covered in anchors, and he uses them as weapons and clothing. I think that's cool. It subtly has that nautical vibe, but it could also be that they're not actually anchors, but it is more of just a sort of Nordic-inspired waistcoat there, which is very fitting and very cool. And additionally, too, all the weapons kind of being like harpoons or other different style kind of blades that you might see on some sort of sailor or fisherman or something like that. That's really nice attention for detail that is being put there in those weapons. That's awesome to see. So lots I love about this one, and a really cool way of approaching a custom head design. This next mark is by Alex Mertens, and it's called TR35K. And I think this mark is just fantastic. It looks awesome. All these different kind of wires that are poking through the design, the little bits of red, yellow, and blue. It's just beautiful. Such a lovely aesthetic to this mark. But let's take a look at the custom head design on this one, because it's pretty cool. So he's kind of branched it off of a Nuva shoulder element in white there. And there's a whole bunch of just kind of funky elements. Those big horns coming out, these really strong piercing eyes, and then this interesting kind of mouth apparatus. Just looks cool. Getting some of those washer elements with the kind of tooth ridge around the edge. They're a bit of an older variation on that washer element. Nowadays, they don't have that tooth look to them, but you can get certain gear elements that do have that sort of similar aesthetic to them. And there's a lot of people that like to make custom head designs that exactly like that. They kind of have used those elements, and it makes it look more like it has a sort of toothy grin of sorts. And I like the fact that Alex has inverted it here. And has kind of made it look more like some sort of breathing apparatus or something, but it still has that slight menacing aspect to it that kind of almost resembles teeth, but just sort of has that more sort of sinister line, kind of jagged look to it. It's cool. It makes this mark look a little bit more evil, a little bit more sinister, more kind of mechanical. It's awesome. But I love the eye design on this. What appears to be using some of those sort of smaller kind of cylinder pieces there, and then feeding some lightsaber rods or flex tubing into them to kind of create a kind of pupil design inside that eye. Really pops, really makes it more sort of scary and sinister to actually sort of physically see the pupil, make the eyes really stand out and pop. As you kind of frame the eye almost with the kind of grey cylinder there, it really makes it scary looking. So I think there's some cool principles being played with there, whether you want to kind of see what you can do to create a kind of toothy design or invert it and change it up to make it look a little bit more mechanical and interesting, and finding different ways that you can play around with eyes, having them have pupils, make them look a little bit more scary and stuff. Those are definitely some principles or ideas you could take into building your own custom heads, and I think this is just a really stellar, awesome example of how cool that can look. And final thing on this mark, because I actually really love it, the rib cage, the rib design on this mark. Fantastic. Just repeating those skull spider leg pieces there really creates a very sinister looking ribcage design. Simple, but very effective. Does the job. Beautiful mark. Next mark here, it's by Jack the Mad, and it's called Minotaur. So what I like about this head design is it's a really nice combination of system and Bionicle, but it's very heavy Bionicle or kind of Technic elements that's very subtly complemented by system pieces. And that's always a good way of approaching something if you're not someone that has a lot of system in their collection, or you're just somebody that doesn't have much experience with system pieces. That can be a good way of exploring with your system stuff, just to kind of very lightly put it in, let it kind of complement elements. So let's talk about how he's done that here. So if we look at the sort of forehead, the kind of top of this mark, we can see that the kind of eyebrows over the eyes are being created with Borak eyes in black. And additionally, those are all kind of connected to various different sizes and shapes of different lift arm pieces. And so that's kind of the main kind of Bionicle base there. Additionally, if we kind of go down towards the sort of snout, the kind of front of the mouth there is a slicer head piece that's sort of forming the bulk of that. But then the nostrils are using a newer element, which is a 1x2 plate that kind of has the curved edges to it. and that sort of forms the nostrils of the nose there. And then some system elements also form the eyes. Those are some horn pieces that typically come on your system sets. And then the actual white horns on this mock are also using system elements. So it's nice to see this sort of nice balance between the two here, and it really helps to create a very realistic, effective, real-looking Minotaur head. It's really nice to see, actually. So I think that's the beautiful thing about making a custom head design is you can do stuff like this, you know? You might have built this whole body and then you get to the head and you go, well, I was hoping for a Minotaur, but LEGO hasn't really made any Minotaur heads from anything that I can think of, you know? Well, not that's big enough to put on the mock that I've made, you know? There's like a minifigure Minotaur head, but that's too small, you know? All that sort of stuff. But if you go for a custom head design, you can do whatever your heart desires. You can build whatever your mind can create, because then you are able to do that. You are able to make that Minotaur head that previously didn't exist. So that's one of the beautiful things about making a good custom head design. And that's a beautiful thing about playing with system too. You can really, really get those details in there. And you can really push the boundaries, really make it pop, make it look awesome. The armor on this mock is cool too. I love the sort of shoulder design here, this nice little pop of gold, some nice kind of color layering, just focusing that up on the top here. It makes it look more mythological, more like it's straight out of myth and legend. And I don't know, that gold kind of conjures up a bit of an atmosphere of that in my eyes there. I think that's just quite beautiful, and the rest of this mock looks fantastic. I love the sort of hoof design and the weapon design. Really, really awesome. The next mock we've got is Toa Shaoia, and it is by the Lego Brony. So yeah, up top at the start of the episode, I mentioned that there was a mock that had a custom element in it, and this is that mock. The kind of main visor piece on this mask that came from an Invasion Below set, but they, to my knowledge, did not come in black. So he's either sort of painted or sharpied that, and as a result, he has a cool-looking black visor element, which I think actually looks awesome and really makes this this custom head design here look super cool. So, yeah, I'm always of the belief that, hey, if you want to paint or customize your Lego pieces, you want to cut them, you want to 3D print them, whatever, that's totally your choice and completely up to you, and it can make mocks look super, super cool. So if that's something that floats your boat, do it. If you don't want to do it, that's okay too. It can still be a fun challenge to work within the limitations of Lego. But if that is something you want to do, let's talk about that. So I think what's cool about this is that this element is really nicely placed in with all these other pieces surrounding it. You know, we take a look at the interesting sort of sloped piece that flows out of this visor. It has a very similar shape to the visor element. It kind of has this almost sort of triangular look to it, and so it's beautiful to see that flow down into another piece so seamlessly. They have very similar shapes and sizes. It works. And then we look at the side of the mask here. He's used some other sort of curved slope element pieces that again kind of flow into the mask. So he's been very consistent with his textures here, and it just works. It pops. It's nice to see. Additionally, it's also nice to see these horns. I think those are very fitting and very cool, and they just kind of make the mock look more sort of edgy and cool and sinister. It's nice to see, and I think horns are always a nice addition to a cool helmet design. So it's good to see. So yeah, this mock again uses a fair bit more system in this custom head design, and it really helps you to kind of pack in detail into a smaller space. So it's definitely something to consider and use if you're planning a custom head design. Additionally, though, this mock is also fantastic. I love the little pops of lavender throughout it. The black and lavender color scheme works very nicely, and I think honestly, there's not enough lavender mocks out there, man. All those Friends colors can be really, really nice when you use them well in a mock, and I think this is a great example of that. So a cool head design and some cool color playing there, really cool. On to the next mock. It's by the Mug Bearer, and it's called Tachi. So the Mug Bearer is a kind of the connoisseur of custom mask designs, especially system heavy ones. And I wanted to showcase this one because I thought it was super cool. This sort of glowing visor in these translucent colors that wouldn't exist with your typical bricks. I don't believe those pieces come in that color, but hey, if you're building in the digital world, you can do whatever you want with color. But still, you could easily do something fairly similar with this design. I just love this idea of having this sort of light up eye head display, this kind of mono eye design, or it's some sort of, interesting kind of, not really glasses, that's the wrong word, but some sort of visor that goes over your eyes with this interesting kind of heads up display. It looks cool and works well. Additionally too, using some of these sort of newer tile elements that sort of have rounder edges to them to kind of form the kind of front of the mask on this head design here. Something very Bionicle about it, and it looks super cool. The sword on this mock is also fantastic. Kind of reminds me of certain anime sword designs and stuff, but it's also just sort of just different. Again, more system heavy, but it's not a sword. It's not a style of sword you see every day on a Bionicle mock. So I can really respect that. Now, I would talk a bit more about this, but I want to talk about something else that the Mug Bearer has done, which is still along the same lines with custom heads. This is something you can actually get yourself, some instructions you can get yourself. This is some brick-built Kanohi masks in a Kanohi mask pack for the Toa Metru. So this is all of the Toa Metru masks built in system elements. And I think the Mug Bearer has really effectively captured the life and the just the natural aesthetics and looks of those mask elements in system form. And I think that's a fun challenge for yourself too. Maybe you have a mask sitting in your collection, but at the moment, I don't know, it just doesn't work on your mock. You like it, but there's just something that isn't right. Well, could you rebuild that mask using system elements, and then maybe that little something that isn't quite right then becomes right, and so you still get that very similar aesthetic, but it's slightly different now. Maybe that could work for you, and I think this is a phenomenal way of doing that, and the Mug Bearer is definitely the king of doing stuff like that, building system versions of Bionicle masks. And I didn't say you can actually purchase these instructions if you are interested, so yeah, by all means, there's links in the description. If you want to build these yourself, you can do so. So very nice. Let's move on to the last mock now. This is Otto the Comedian by ShadowGear6335. So fun fact, if you're still listening, there will be a little fun, funky podcast with my boy ShadowGear6335 very, very soon. Very, very soon. Probably Monday or Sunday that I post that. I don't know yet. I've still got to finish off editing that one there, but it's good fun. And we mentioned this mock in that podcast. It's a phenomenal mock, and I love the custom head design on this one. I think there's something to say about just playing around with a whole bunch of different smaller system pieces, your curved slopes, your grill plates, all that sort of stuff. We're even seeing those similar pieces across a whole bunch of the masks we saw today, and even some of the ones that the Mug Bearer had made there. And I think if you just kind of play around with those pieces, you don't necessarily even have an end goal, you just kind of see what you can make, you can achieve some really nice looking head designs that are very different from your typical mask. You can just achieve some more unique and different results. And additionally too, if you're using those system pieces, you can start to play around with more of those obscure colors that only exist or are a little bit more common in system sets. And Mr. Brendan here was talking to me in the podcast the other day about the Lego Dots sets. And, he's definitely someone that likes to use those pieces in his mocks and his various work in progress things. So it's super cool to also think about that. Can you buy some of those dot sets, which honestly are such good sets? Lots of cool colors, lots of cool shapes, all that sort of stuff. But you could definitely be playing around with color, definitely be playing around with newer pieces, newer elements, all that sort of stuff. And it would work well for a custom mask. So something to consider there, that's for sure. Cool head design, but I love the shoulder design on this mock too, using that translucent dish piece there, and then putting some rubber bands inside it to create this sort of more ornate, interesting pattern. It's really cool, really pretty. And then the wheel design on this mock is fantastic, a really funky, different way of designing a leg design for a mock, and it just looks cool. Additionally too, I like the name for this mock, that he's a comedian. The description here said that he is a humdrum comic that plays clubs every other night. He used to have a gig as a bomb defusing robot. Man, does he have some stories to tell. I like that. And that's cool. There's a fun little story there and works with the character. A lot of life in this one. Really cool mock. But that is it for a bunch of custom head designs in this custom head design episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series. If you liked the mocks you saw in today's episode and you want to see some of the other stuff those guys have made, be sure to check the links in the description where you can see all of their stuff. Additionally, you can see links to my own social media in the links in the description below, where you can probably see me post my own custom head designs. So stay tuned for that. Additionally, if you want to see your own mocks appear on the Bionicle Inspiration series, you can submit them through the email you're currently seeing on your screen. Include as many pictures or as little amount of pictures as you want, and any information that you feel is important. And if that's nothing, cool. But you can submit it that way. Bear in mind your patience is key, of course. I've got a lot of submissions to work through, but I will do my best to put it on the show where I can. But that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.